All right, Falcons fans, let's dive into your questions from today's mailbag. Now, let's kick things off with Archangel's question about Tyler Allgeier. Any updates on the talks about him and his trade value? Well, a lot of teams could have their eyes on him. I mean, the guy ran for over 1,000 yards in his rookie season. He's proven himself to be one of the best RB2s out there, and honestly, he could easily start for several teams. That said, I don't see much movement happening until after the draft. Why? Because this running back class is absolutely stacked. Teams will likely wait to see if they can grab a younger, cheaper option through the draft. So I'd say hold off for now, but this feels like a potential move we could see unfold during the third day of the draft. Remember when DeAndre Swift was traded from the Lions to the Eagles? The Lions drafted a running back and then basically said, "Who wants one?" The Eagles jumped in and made the deal. That's the kind of timeline we're looking at here with Allgeier. Next up, Anthony sent in a $5 super chat. Thank you, Anthony, asking whether we should keep Kyle Pitts or trade him for picks. Oof. This is one of the most polarizing topics out there. I've made my thoughts clear on this. If the Falcons don't plan to use him, then it might be best to move on. Looking at the way they used him last season, especially at the end of the year, I'm not convinced he justifies that $10+ million cap hit for 2025. By the end of last season, Kyle Pitts was playing less than 50% of the snaps. I don't know if it was the scheme, or maybe he just wasn't a fit with Kirk Cousins, but he wasn't a focal point. If the Falcons plan to use him more, then sure, keep him. But if not, what's the point? Imagine if Charlie Warner ends up getting more snaps than Pitts in the red zone. That's when I'd be pretty upset about keeping him around. We've seen trades happen in the middle of the draft, so who knows? A team could trade for Pitts if they miss out on a tight end they wanted. Let's wait and see. Now, Vincent Cutts has a thought on Kirk Cousins potentially starting for the Falcons in 2025. He believes it could happen, but here's the reality check. It'd probably require a Michael Penix injury for that to come to fruition. Unless Penix really struggles, there's no way they bench him in his first full season as the starter. However, I could see a scenario where they tell Kirk to stay at home and then try to move him mid-season to a team with a quarterback injury. Alternatively, what if Kirk comes in to replace an injured Penix and balls out? That would throw a wrench in everything, but hey, it's a possibility. And lastly, Lav S asks which players are must-grabs if they fall to 15 in the draft. Well, we'll dive deeper into that later. But if a guy like Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, or Christian Gonzalez is there, you have to pull the trigger. Let's just say this draft is loaded with talent, and the Falcons have some tough decisions ahead. All right, Falcons fans, let's dive right into the conversation. Even if Atlanta is looking to trade down, I don't think they'll have a lot of teams knocking at the door to move up to that 15th spot. However, if some players fall to 15, it could be a different story. Here's my top 10 right now, factoring in positional need for the Falcons. First off, I don't think they're going to go after an offensive lineman. That could be an option down the road, especially if they need to find a new blindside tackle to replace Caleb McGarry. If they do, a guy like Armin Mayu from Missouri, who played right tackle for the Tigers, could be a solid replacement, but that's something I think could wait for next year. Now, looking at the guys who could fall to 15, Will Johnson from Michigan is a top guy I'm really high on. Then there's Jalen Walker from Georgia and Mike Green. Those are the three players I'd focus on for Atlanta. They'd be great fits to help strengthen the team going forward. Moving on to another question from Jeremy. If the Falcons can't trade Kirk Cousins and end up releasing him, should Arthur Blank fire Terry Fontenot? My answer: no. I don't think Blank will be blindsided by this. He's on board with the plan, and the strategy is to see if any teams need a quarterback during the season. If no one wants Cousins, they could hold on to him and wait for a team to experience a quarterback injury. and then his value could shoot up. They're playing the long game here, and I'm sure Arthur Blank is fully aware of what's going on. They won't be cutting him in March and losing out on $10 million, that's for sure. Now let's touch on the question from Burner Pie, who asked if Kirk Cousins deserves all the money he's made. The short answer, yes, he earned it. He didn't get that contract by luck. Teams needed a quarterback, and when he was a free agent, he was in a position to get paid. Could he have earned it based on wins per million? Maybe not, but when you're a free agent at the right time, you take full advantage of it, and Cousins did just that. He showed enough under contract to warrant the next deal. Next up, Austin asked if the Falcons should draft an edge rusher in round 1. For the first time in a while, that could be a good idea. If they do, here's my preference in order: Mike Green, Mykel Williams, and James Pierce. Green is a bit controversial, mainly because of the competition he faced, but I think that's a bit overstated. He played against some decent players like DeMarcus Ware, so I wouldn't say his level of competition is a huge knock. The bigger concern is the off-field issues, specifically the sexual assault allegations. The Falcons will have to do their due diligence here and make sure they're comfortable with him. As for Mykel Williams, he had a bit of an injury last season, which impacted his numbers. But let's be honest, on that stacked Georgia defense, it's tough to stand out. When you've got future first-rounders like Malachi Starks, Jalen Walker, and Mykel Williams all around you, it's hard to be the star. Still, Williams could be a solid pick. Then there's James Pierce. The concern with Pierce is that he relies heavily on speed to get by, and I'd prefer to see a guy win with power over speed. There are just some concerns with his overall game, and whether he can be that reliable, all-around player the Falcons need on the edge. Let's dive into the world of NFL players and their impact on the game. When it comes to speed, I'm not talking about the kind that gets you in trouble. I'm referring to the quickness on the field. While speed is exciting, I'd take power any day. Why? Because power is something you can't easily fix with better offensive tackles. If a player wants to push you back toward the quarterback, there's not much you can do about it. Now, before we get into more questions, let's take a moment to appreciate the Falcons draft hat. It's pretty slick, right? If you're a fan, you might want to check it out. Shout out to Aiden Stackhouse for the kind words. We appreciate the support and love from our fans. Now, let's get into some player discussions. First up, there's a question about David Onyemata. Will he be traded or cut this season? I don't think so. Atlanta has made its choice between Onyemata and Grady Jarrett, and they're sticking with Onyemata. If you look at last year's performance, Onyemata actually outplayed Jarrett when you strip away the emotional ties of moving on from a player who's been with the team for a decade. So, I believe Onyemata will remain a key part of this team as their nose tackle. Next, we have a question about which player drafted last year, aside from Bijan Robinson, will make the biggest leap forward. Let's break it down by draft order. You've got Rook in round 2, Bralin in round 3, Brandon in round 4, and then Casey Washington and Zion Logue. Speaking of Zion, he's no longer with the team and is now with the Bills. Jace McClendon could see a bigger role in his third year, especially with Tyler Allgeier ahead of him, but I wasn't too thrilled about that pick initially since he didn't add much to the running back room. That leaves us with Casey Washington, who had a solid preseason. I remember when Bijan made a great throw to him against the Broncos, even though Washington got a concussion on the play. Then there's Dorian, who I'm not too high on. So, we're left with Rook and Trice. Rook battled through an ankle injury last season and was a healthy scratch for the first third of the year. With Grady Jarrett out of the picture, Rook is set for a bigger opportunity, so I'm going to go with him as he works his way back to full strength after his ACL injury. Now, if something major doesn't happen before September, some might say this offseason has been a total bust. Raheem Morris would disagree, though. He was asked about the defense's struggles last year and the lack of significant moves. While I think the draft should be a big part of evaluating Atlanta's offseason, it's hard to ignore that the pass rush ranked 31st last year, and the solution was to sign a player over 30 who had 8.5 sacks last season. Not ideal, but it's not the end of the world either. Let's keep the conversation rolling about the Falcons and their offseason moves. While I would have liked to see a bit more action, the reality is that there haven't been many great opportunities to upgrade the pass rush. It's not like the Falcons missed out on a bunch of bargain deals, they just didn't find the right fit. For instance, I'm not upset they passed on giving Josh Sweat $21 million. He's been one of the more inconsistent players at his position, so I can't say it was a huge mistake to let that one go. Honestly, I don't think there was a standout pass rusher available this offseason that would have made a significant difference. Now, let's talk about Drake London. Thanks for the super chat. Last year, I predicted he would finish with around 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns, and guess what? He ended up with 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. So, I was pretty spot on. This year, I'm feeling optimistic again. I'll say he'll grab about 105 receptions, rack up 1,200 yards, and score 10 touchdowns. That sounds about right. Moving on to the center position, do I think we'll address it in the 4th round? I believe the Falcons have already made their move by bringing in Ryan Neuzil to take over for Drew Dalman. Neuzil played a significant role last season when Dalman was sidelined with an ankle injury. Given the limited draft capital, I don't see center being a priority this year. They might roll the dice with Neuzil and look for a late-round option, but I doubt they'll reach for a center in the 4th round, especially since it's a weak class. Unless one of the 2 Georgia interior offensive linemen falls to that spot, I don't see it happening. Now, let's talk trades. Tony Wright brought up an interesting scenario where Jacksonville gets Atlanta's 1st-round pick, and in return, Atlanta receives Trayvon Walker and Jacksonville's 2nd-round pick. This trade would give Jacksonville 2 first-rounders at picks 5 and 15. If we break it down, you're essentially valuing Trayvon Walker between the 36th and 15th picks. According to the trade value chart, Walker would be worth around the 39th overall pick. The trade value chart assigns a numerical value to every draft pick, so if you want to trade up to the Falcons' 15th pick, it would cost you 1,500 draft points. You'd need to combine picks to reach that number for a fair trade. If you take the 1,500 points for pick 15 and subtract the 540 points for Jacksonville's 36th pick, you're looking at something around the Bears' pick at 39. I don't think the Jaguars would value Walker that low. They'd likely want more. So while Jacksonville gets 2 first-rounders, I don't think that's enough for them to part with Walker. Lastly, Tony Taylor mentioned a potential trade where the Browns acquire Atlanta's 1st-round pick in exchange for a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 4th. This would mean the Browns get pick number 15, while Atlanta would receive pick 33, the 1st pick in round 2, the 3rd pick in round 3, and the 1st pick in round 4. That's an intriguing deal, and I'm all for exploring options that could benefit the Falcons. Let's break down the trade value chart because it's a crucial tool for evaluating potential deals. Jimmy Johnson created this chart for moments just like this, helping us determine if a trade is fair. For instance, pick number 15 is valued at 1,050 points. If we look at what the Browns are offering, their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks, the total adds up to around 901 points. That's not too far off from the 18th pick, which is pretty close to 15. So, is this a good deal? I'd say it's fair. It's not far off from what the Vikings gave up last year to move into the 1st round with the Texans. The Browns could definitely make this work, and the Falcons would walk away with a lot of picks, which is always a plus. Here's a theory I have. Pick 33 might actually be more valuable than pick 32. Why? Because pick 33 comes 15 hours after pick 32, giving you that extra time to work the phones and negotiate a better trade. If you're at pick 32, you're kind of rushed. The only real difference is the 5th-year option, which is valuable, but that extra time could lead to a more advantageous deal. Now, let's tackle the question about sleepers in the 1st and 2nd rounds. Great question. On the offensive side, I'm looking at Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. He's got impressive size, tested well, and produced despite being part of a lackluster offense. He's definitely one to keep an eye on. On the defensive side, I'll mention Darian Porter, a 6'3" cornerback, which is a rare find. But I also want to highlight Omar Norman Lott, a defensive tackle from Tennessee. He's one of the best pass-rushing defensive tackles we've seen in recent drafts. The catch? He's a bit smaller and doesn't play enough snaps to justify a first-round pick. If you're investing in a first-rounder, you want someone who's going to be on the field consistently. Norman Lott is more of a rotational player and a specialist in passing situations, but when he's on the field, he can wreak havoc in the middle of the line. To wrap up today's episode, if you're still with me, drop an ATL in the comments. I love seeing the loyal fans who stick around until the end. So go ahead, roll on down, and let's see those ATLs.